Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Today's episode is pretty special because we're going to talk about a topic that I'm very interested in, but many people don't know much about. And I have a special guest who's going to help me unpack all of this and try for us to understand a little bit more what it's about. Neurodivergence, we're going to talk about what it means, what makes neurodivergent people different, how does it affect them, and more specifically, how it affects my guest, who is also a software engineer. Shae is currently the CTO of Mentra. It's a startup that's focused on creating a matching system that connects neurodivergent people with companies who are looking for talent, basically. And it allows these companies to understand the different adjustments they need to make to accommodate the people. But before we dive into our topic, consider supporting this podcast and all of the content I put out there. I literally work 7 days a week, and I'm not joking about that, just so that I can make sure that you get the most out of what I learned, what my guests know, and what's happening really in the field right now. You can send a one-time donation, or you can subscribe to Patreon, where you can get access to a lot of exclusive perks, which are very nice. One of them, the one I really like, is the bi-weekly hangout that I do with my Patreons, where we literally discuss any topic that comes to mind. They define the agenda, and I come in and share all of my perspective on it. As usual, the links are in the description, so you know what to do. I'm not gonna pester you with that anymore. Switching over to my guest, Shae, thank you very much for joining me today.
Bassem, thank you for having me. I'm super excited you took time out of your day to talk, and I'm really excited to be here.
Ah, perfect. Let's dive right into it, right? So first of all, help me understand what neurodiversity is and what does this term stand for?
Yeah, neurodiversity represents a breadth of ways in which individuals think, how they act, and how they perceive the world. It covers conditions including autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADD, dyscalculia. It covers a lot of things which affect how individuals exist in the world, how they interact with it, or how they think about it, or how they interact with people in the world, basically.
So there's a lot of controversy about neurodiversity, and I will jump to that in a little bit. But before we do so, why do you feel like, or why do you think neurodiversity has become more of a movement? Sometimes even a statement of sorts. Why does it spark a lot of controversy even?
One thing that I think affects a lot of people is that neurodiversity is, quote, invisible. People think that conditions or experiences like autism have a look. I've heard this quote a lot. You don't look autistic. Does autism have a look? It's not supposed to. And I think people in this world, people in the world have a very, I would say, stereotypical picture in their head of what autism or other things are supposed to look like, but the reality is far from the truth. Like, autism and other things don't have a look. We're people. We're people in this world just doing our thing, and some of us have different needs. Some of us experience the world in different ways, whether that's we experience sensations too much or too little or in a different way. And what's also really true is that some of these conditions exist simultaneously. A lot of people have autism and ADHD, or they have autism and dyslexia, or they have autism and anxiety, or something else. So I would say that the controversy comes about when people have this idea in their heads of what it should or shouldn't look like, or what their interaction with somebody is supposed to be, and the reality is often far from the truth.
Is it offending when someone asks you, or when someone makes that statement that you don't look autistic?
I've gotten past that, to be honest. I use it as more of a teaching moment to challenge their assumptions, because I think we all come into this world with, to be honest, like a stereotype or a way in which we expect something to act according to social media, television, what you see online. And when something goes counter to your beliefs, you either double down on it or you're open to change. So I use it as an opportunity to educate people and help them understand that saying that autism doesn't have a look is accurate. And when they assume that people with autism behave or act a certain way, it can be frustrating for people. I've had it happen to me so much where I get some kind of desensitized to it, but other folks out there would respond much more I don't know what the word is, but they would have a much bigger response than someone to me like me
Yeah.
who's used
Or
to it. But someone
friction. Or,
more friction, there would be more of a tense interaction, I would say. I'm kind of past that because I know how to respond to that, but other people who feel more strongly about the subject might respond differently.
what do you think fuels this perception that people has? Why do you think people? Because we're born, obviously, we really don't know. We cannot we categorize people based on behaviors, but for someone who has never seen people who are autistic or maybe engaged with people who are autistic, you really don't have that category in your head. But somehow, when you mention autism to people, an image comes to their mind. Where is this image coming from? Do you think?
It depends a lot on their exposure to social media, TV, the internet, and stuff like that, and then also their own experiences. One thing that I've ran into is that whenever I talk about autism with someone else, almost everybody I know knows somebody else besides me who is autistic or neurodivergent in some way, and all their experiences vary. So the most that people typically know about autism or neurodiversity comes out of their personal experiences with it, and those experiences are very varied from person to person. For some individuals, they have a lot of support needs. They need a lot of help to get through the day, to get through school, to get through work, whatever. And those are the experiences that they have that they share with people in their social network, with their family, with their friends, whatever. And that's one way those experiences come out. Another way is through the internet, through TV. We have shows like The Big Bang Theory with Sheldon being a not so subtly autistic individual who plays into a lot of those stereotypes, unfortunately, and that doesn't really help. It doesn't spark a conversation around it. It's a stereotype made to people laugh, and it's frustrating when we're the butt of the joke. There's other content out there which has really transformed how people perceive it. Um, I think shows like Love on the Spectrum are are doing a lot of good work in that regards. Is it perfect? No. But I think that shows on Love on the Spectrum on Netflix are doing an amazing job of opening a conversation and showing that autism looks different to different people. And it's not just whatever you see on TV. It really is different. There's one individual from the most recent season who was extremely bubbly and eccentric and struggled with executive functioning. And you have other people on the show who are the exact opposite or have different strengths and weaknesses. So to put people into a bucket is harmful. And unfortunately, that's a lot of what I would say historical television has done. I think we're seeing a lot more tasteful and thoughtful discussion of it these days. But I would say we have all of the television and all of the internet videos before now, which are doing harm, but we're starting to do a better job. It's a slow process. And I think there's still room to go. But I think progress is progress in this department.
I love that show that you mentioned. Like, I would never have even, watched it myself, but my girlfriend is a psychologist and she put it on for a few times. And I was like, I also had a completely wrong impression of how autistic people would behave. And then I saw that there's also a lot of diversity, with how autism manifests itself with different people and how they engage and what challenges it poses for them.
Yeah, I watched it. I watched the show with my fiance, and we talk a lot about it because a lot of my experiences early on dating my fiance, some of them were similar, some of them weren't. I was pretty upfront with her about my autism early on in the process. We started dating pretty right before COVID. Actually, we met in February 2020 before all the shutdowns happened, and then very early on we were emotionally available to each other. And I said, "Hey, I have autism, and this is how it affects me." I think what's missing a lot is that this is how it affects me. This is what you should expect, just to set expectations. And I think that's really helpful for her to understand. Like sometimes I'll say something or act a certain way or do something, and at least I have a cause behind it. It's not an excuse if I'm not being nice, but at least there's a reason, and I'm trying to get better at it. Another thing I'll also add is I just saw a play in the Boston area recently called Jonathan, which describes an autistic 19-year-old who works retail during Christmas. That could be anyone's worst nightmare, but it's especially the worst nightmare for somebody who's autistic or neurodivergent. And I was really having a visceral experience during this show because of how much I related to it, because of how everything was characterized, and also the reality of it going into employment. Um, Jonathan's boss and his peer were kind of clueless on how to give him a supportive environment. there's just not a lot of information, not a lot of training about how do you support neurodivergent people in the workplace. And I saw that firsthand through Jonathan, and it was really hard. It was really interesting for me. It was upsetting in a good way because it was so accurate, and it was just a crazy experience for me. And went up to the play afterwards and I said, "Thank you for this amazing piece of work."
Amazing. I love this because we also take it for granted representation in works of art or shows. We also understand ourselves by seeing um, characters that we can identify with, right? It's sort of a mirror to our reflection of ourselves, a mirror to our identity. And if we don't provide this mirror to as large of a group as possible, we are sort of denying a big group that, ability to identify themselves and even understand themselves at a higher level of depth by seeing a representation of themselves in shows and whatever entertainment they consume.
Yeah, it's really powerful for me to see either these types of work about neurodiversity or including people who are neurodiverse themselves. I don't know if this show, I'll say it again, Jonathan, I don't know if the lead actor was neurodivergent himself. Even if he wasn't, I still think his characterization was really accurate. And I know that there's another show out there, which I'm blinking on the name of, which also includes autistic and neurodivergent actors in it, playing in New York. I'm going to look up the name in a little bit, but there's another show out there, a work of theater, which is highlighting autistic and neurodivergent actors in roles portraying autistic neurodivergent people, and I love that. And I'm really happy that not only are we having stories be told about us, but we're being invited to the table, that our feedback and our insights are actively being included. And
100%.
It's really important to me.
Who wants to see another movie from the same character of sorts, right? Like all of the actors are sort of becoming the same now. There's not a lot of diversity in the show that they put out, and I would be very curious and interested in seeing how other people live their lives, and how that can be reflected in drama and in movies and so on and so forth.
The other musical is called How to Dance in Ohio. That's the name of the other musical. It's playing in Syracuse right now. I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to see it, but I want to at some point.
Perfect. Sounds great. Awesome. All right. Let's talk a little bit about you, right? So how does your autism manifest itself? And do you have any externally visible symptoms, or is it more of an internal manifestation for you?
I would say growing up, it was more obvious. I would say I would probably lean closer to how autism looks or how it is perceived by people around you. I was kind of socially oblivious. I would say things without understanding why. I had a much higher degree of sensory overload. To me, right now, then and now, I would say it's more of a sensory thing where I perceive light, sound, taste, feel, touch, sensory in a very different way for people. Like I have really, really, really good hearing. The problem is if I'm in like a party or a loud club or a concert, it can be overwhelming and I have a hard time picking out like a voice in a crowd. If I'm in like a party environment and I have 10 people talking all around me and someone's trying to talk to me, I'll have a really hard time hearing them. I'll have to like get up in their face and ask them to like really enunciate. And that's just how my body works. I don't really have a choice in that matter. I can spend so much time trying to focus on them, but my brain's just like trying to pull in so many input sources from once. But I would say as I was growing up, for me it was more of a social thing, social awareness, being an individual, being a leader, being a problem solver. Those are things that I went through throughout my time in elementary school, middle school, high school. When I got to Cornell, I spent a lot of time trying to work on those things. I became a teaching assistant. It's funny, actually. I knew that being a TA would help me do these things. So I applied to be a TA, and then I got paid as a TA, either with academic credit or a salary. So I got Cornell to pay me to help me fix these things, which was really cool. But being a TA really helped me be a leader, conflict resolution, talking slowly, dealing with unknown situations. And that was really helpful for me to put myself in an uncomfortable situation, but still have that support structure to help me if I ran into a problem, if I didn't know how to do something, as that was really a big part of it.
I want to dig a little bit into the controversy, and I want to play the devil's advocate just purely for exploratory purposes, right? So what you just described could be traits, for example, that people can manifest those traits. Like, for example, when you describe what you just described, whoever is listening can say, "Oh, I get overwhelmed in parties as well." Right? Sometimes I feel a sensory overload. Sometimes I feel like I need to shut down a little bit if I'm being exposed to a large audience and I have to do a lot of interactions and things like that. Where is the how is the diagnosis made? And where do we draw the line between people who are actually autistic and people who can exhibit some of these traits?
That goes into the idea of self-diagnosis. And to your point more directly, medical diagnoses for these things are difficult to obtain. And it depends a lot on what structures you have, where you live, what's around you, and also the social norms around it. If your family or your friends don't want to hear about it, then they will stop you from doing it, and there's nothing you can do outside of disobeying them. So that's one factor. The other factor is time. It could take a lot of time to get a diagnosis because there's a waiting list. You have to go to multiple appointments. You have to come back for things. It can take a lot of time, and it's expensive. In the United States, at least, these diagnoses can cost several $1,000s, and it's mostly out-of-pocket. Insurance doesn't really cover it typically. It's not a life-threatening thing. It doesn't really get covered by insurance, so that's just a lot of money for people that they don't have. And folks associate with neurodiversity, whether it's autism, EDG, or something else, because they lack the resources or the support structure or something else to have that diagnosis on paper. That doesn't invalidate their experiences, especially because there's so many barriers to this sort of thing when there shouldn't be. And when you talk about folks who have self-diagnosis, I would say that their experiences are extremely valid. And they have a much harder time navigating this community because of that otherness, which shouldn't be there. I'm not going to get into the details of how the diagnosis is made from a medical sense. 'Cause I'm not a doctor. It's not my trade. But for a lot of folks, if they, as you said, exhibit all the signs or have these experiences that they relate to, that doesn't make their experiences any more or less than mine. I would argue they have a harder time doing it because it's not on paper and they have to defend themselves a lot more aggressively. Whereas I can pull out a diagnosis paperwork which says I have a medical diagnosis for this, and that makes things easier. I don't like pull it out of the sky every time I feel like getting into an argument with somebody, but if I ever had to pull out diagnosis paperwork, it's easy for me. But for someone else, they have to you just have to trust me. And some people it isn't an option. If you're trying to get accommodations in a workplace, an academic setting, or somewhere else, they often require paperwork to say you are or aren't dyslexic, ADHD, autistic, something else. And if you don't have the paperwork, then it becomes infinitely harder to get those accommodations. Some employers and some universities or academic institutions will pay for these things, but again, it's still not a perfect system. It's a spider web, it's a labyrinth you have to try to get through. It's not easy.
Here, I understand, and here's another challenging idea. Life is hard in general, probably more so for people who are neurodivergent, but also for some people, they could use a potential diagnosis to escape dealing with the difficulties of life, right? Some people can just want to get a free pass, let's say, for certain things, right? It would be very troubling that they need to go this far to get that free pass, but it happens, right? Some people do it. What do you really think about that? And do you see this happening more frequently? Because I've been reading that the diagnosis for ADHD, for example, and autism has spiked since the 1980s. Maybe because there's more awareness about it, but also maybe because people are more identifying with this even further. But also one potential idea, it could be that people are, using this as a mechanism to not deal with some of things that they could deal with.
So there's two things there. There's people using the diagnosis to get out of something they want to do. And that, again, that depends on the person a lot. Some individuals can't do the same things. They can't be at a loud party. They can't be in a certain environment, not because they don't want to, but because either for the sensory or social reasons, they lack the ability to do it, and that shouldn't be a shame on them. We should be building structures, or it's okay to do these things. Or not do these things in this regard. And some people are different. Like if I had to go to a loud party, if I needed to, I could do it. I might not be happy. I might kind of like stay by my fiance or whoever I was with at the time. I could do it, but begrudgingly. Other folks wouldn't do it at all if they have trauma around it, if they have some sort of past history with it, if they're really afraid or anxious. There's so many reasons why they wouldn't go and do that thing, and they don't have the capacity to. And we shouldn't be shaming these people for using that as a reason. And it's whatever they're comfortable with. And
100%.
Again,
but just to clarify this point a little bit, so
I'm
therapy,
getting to the second point. About,
okay, sorry. Yeah,
you asked two questions. I'm answering both questions. The second point about like why has it gone up is that like your second question about why has there been more cases or more diagnoses?
Why has there been more?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, the science is better. We're seeing it earlier. If you were going to get diagnosed with ADHD late 20th century, you wouldn't be diagnosed with ADHD, it would have been something else. Or he's just special, and you go to the special school, and there's no more in-depth look into it. They kind of sort of brush you to the side. Now, where we are with the science and with the perception and general awareness of it, people are a lot more comfortable. Number one, as a medical provider diagnosing it, it's much more obvious and easy to see these things when they happen. And doctors and medical providers are much better trained to be looking out for these things at a younger age. Doesn't mean that people don't get diagnosed very late. I just met somebody who's diagnosed at the 40 or something. But people are being diagnosed more frequently, not because it's happening more frequently in people, but because we're catching it. Catching is the wrong word, because we're identifying it earlier, because we have people who are aware of it and can see these things earlier, and there's less of a stigma around it. Doesn't mean there's no stigma or no tension around it, but it's markedly less than when it was 20, 30 years ago.
True. But also the point that I want to make is, and I probably was not very clear around that, is with therapy, for example, you need to work on your situation to get better, right? However, if you can get a diagnosis of some condition where you can attribute, your lack of ability to solve certain problems or to improve your situation or condition, you can just play the victim and say, I have this condition, there's nothing I can do, my brain is wired this way, that's it. What do you think about this?
Getting better is an interesting term that looks different for different people. As I said, like every person who's neurodiverse is very different. So getting better is very different. And again, it's a level of what you identify as needing to get better at and how comfortable you are putting yourself in that position. And while I can be very comfortable with putting myself in an uncomfortable position to get better at it, someone else might not have the ability to do that. And there's a difference between, I would say, using it as a crutch or as an excuse versus being unable to do it or doing it with significant trauma or negative experiences. Things like a job interview, people can, quote, get better at that over time, but it can still be very traumatic for people if they've had one bad experience with someone who did not treat them with the respect that they needed or was oblivious or intentionally antagonistic towards them because they're neurodiverse. So getting better looks really different for different people, and it's a function of their own state of mind. It's a function of their abilities, and it's a function of what they can and can't do and what they're comfortable with. Like, just because I can go off into a party and exist doesn't mean that someone else with autism can. And I would not force them to do it just so they could get better at it. It doesn't make me feel good. It depends on the person significantly. And while someone else can walk into a crowded room and socialize with people, I might not be able to do that. And it doesn't mean that I don't try to get better at it, but it's one of the things where I sort of like accept it, that I'm not going to be great at that, and that's okay. It really, really, really depends.
Yeah, I agree. Because again, we have this false notion that people are two-dimensional or one-dimensional, or there's one dimension to character, where people need to sort of fall on a certain bell curve, right? There's the normal, and then there are the extremes. And a lot of people believe that this is actually the case, and there is some imaginary, not very well defined idea of what normal is. And probably everybody in their mind has that with different perception of what normal actually is.
Normal is what society says that normal is. It's what the majority say that's just that normal is, and they define normal.
Yeah,
I can define what
but
normal
does
is for me.
society also agree on on what normal is? Because I feel like everybody in their head has an idea of what society thinks as normal, right? How many years have you been working as a software engineer now?
I've been working as a full-time software engineer since 2019, so that's about 3.5 years now.
Do you feel like your condition affects your ability to work as a software engineer? And if it does, how?
I would say yes. I think really early on, I was able to solve a lot of like when I came in, I was like bottom floor engineer, level one engineer. I was like pretty new and nascent. And in my first couple months, I was like really trying to understand like your first corporate environment. How do you network with your peers? How do you have a good relationship with your boss? Do you tell your boss about autism at all? Like I would say in the beginning, it was far more of a social thing. The engineering problems that I was working on were pretty small. I was new engineer, I was a junior engineer basically. So I wasn't being giving anything super heavy duty, I would say. So those problems weren't super difficult. Doesn't mean I didn't have problems with those sorts of things, but when you get into those problems, it's like, how do you know how to reach out to somebody in your team or elsewhere to unblock you to work for your technical problems and then your social problems? Like, if you're having a hard time with someone on your team for whatever reason, how do you go about dealing with that? So I dealt with a lot of that for the first time as a function of being autistic. Like, how do I go about that in a way that's respectful and quote expected of me when these things happen? Talking with your boss, talking with people on your team, and like approaching these people. That was all very new for me, and I didn't really have a how-to guide for these sorts of things. I kind of threw myself into the deep end, and that was kind of by choice on my end, and partially just because I didn't really know any better. I didn't know what else to do at the time, and I definitely found that I was improving over time, just practicing what I was doing, learning from my manager, just like getting feedback regularly and saying like, what should I be doing in a situation? How can I work for this problem? And my manager at the time was really good with me about helping work through these things. And I didn't tell him that I was autistic until a few months after the fact. Because it didn't really affect our relationship. Doesn't mean that it can't affect other people's relationships with their managers. At the time, it didn't affect mine. I was able to characterize my struggles in a way where I'm a brand new engineer. I don't know what I'm doing. And that was enough for him. Um, I'm not saying do that if you need support from your boss. I absolutely recommend disclosing to them if you think it could be helpful for you and your company. I didn't need it at the time, but I later did end disclosing to him, and then he became my boss on that later team later. So then he knew, but it didn't really
What
affect us at the time.
what would have made your experience easier? What would have your
Um,
employer done that would have made your experience easier?
for my first employer, I think having more awareness upfront about the resources that were available to me as someone who was disabled. Again, the thing is, I didn't really disclose that I was disabled in the beginning. This was 2019. I wasn't advertising my being autistic as much as I am right now. So I wasn't, I guess, as out, I guess you'd say, about it. So part of it is I might not be looking in the right place. I wasn't looking for these things. But I think maybe a better understanding of what are the resources that I have either within a community or within parts of the company to network over people who are going for similar things, helping them with their things, them helping me with mine, working through things, and sort of coming together as a team. And this is what like and I ended up finding the ERG, the Employee Resource Group, for people who have disabilities, and that was really helpful for me. And I learned a lot for them. I networked a lot, and I really had a positive time after I found them. But I think it took me a few months to find them. I didn't really know that they existed.
100%. Do you think it could affect your career growth, or does it affect your career growth right now in any way?
Um, yes and no. I think what I'm doing right now with Mentra is very much focused on neurodiversity and autism. So I say it's unlikely I go back to working something outside of that because it's what I know the most about it, because it's something that's personally fulfilling to me. So I would say it will affect where I end up going after Mentra, whatever that is. I'm pretty far away from that in my mind, to be honest with you. But I think it's unlikely that I'll go back to working for a larger outside corporation that doesn't relate to neurodiversity or disability in some way. And that's just because of the nature of what I think is interesting and what I think is personally fulfilling and what I think is making the world a better place. And that's, I would say, it's more from a personal level.
So tell us a little bit more about your company and what you're trying to build.
Yeah, so Mentra is a inclusive hiring platform for neurodiverse job seekers. We're connecting job seekers with employers, companies who want to hire neurodivergent talent and can provide them the support and structure that they need to be successful. If you think about that show I mentioned, Jonathan, he was thrust in a deep end on a holiday weekend at retail, which is anyone's worst nightmare. But for him, he didn't have the support. He didn't have a great manager. He didn't have great peers who were able to give him the training, the support, the accommodations, the hands-on time that he needed to be successful. And he suffered because of that. And what Mentra is trying to do is find talented people who have support needs, who have accommodations, or otherwise have something else going on that just need a little tweak to their environment to be really successful. And we're matching them with employers and companies who say, yes, we can provide you with these sorts of upskilling life skills programs. We can provide you with a low light environment, a private office, sensory devices. We can connect you with our ERG about disabled people or neurodiversity or autism. It's really trying to create meaningful matches where job seekers can thrive. It's not just about getting you a job and then you have fun. It's setting you up for long-term success. And we want folks to feel happy and energized about where they end up getting matched with through Mentra. It's not just about connecting a software engineer to a company who needs software engineers. It's, can you support this individual and their specific needs so they can go and kick ass? And if the answer is no, it is not a good match. But if it is a good match and that employee feels and gets the support that they need, that's what we're after.
Perfect. The cynical in me wants to ask this question, so bear with me here. The the capitalistic nature of our socioeconomical model requires companies to be efficient, sometimes even requiring employees to put in 110, 120, 150%, whatever. What is the incentive for employers to accommodate people who are neurodivergent?
If you don't accommodate them, then they'll leave, and it's pretty simple. It's easy to say, oh, we provide accommodations, but like not help people in that department. Is much more nuanced to give people the structure that they need to be successful. But then once they are, neurodivergent folks can kick some serious ass and can outperform their neurotypical peers in a lot of ways. I'll put on my being pride hat for a second and say that I got promoted pretty quickly at my first company, and I would say that was in large part due to my being autistic and being able to work through problems, see patterns, and make things happen that other people couldn't do or took them long to do. And that was before I was really up and disclosed about my being autistic. So I will say that autistic folks, in whatever capacity, can outperform their neurotypical peers because of their special talents, their skills, and their interest in certain problems. And if you choose to neglect or ignore neurodivergent people, they're going to walk away and find somebody who can give them what they need. And these accommodations, the support structures that employers provide don't have to be expensive. It's just a matter of asking people, what do you need to be successful? That's like a really simple question, and it could open so many things. And it's training managers, training teams about how can you support your neurodivergent direct report or your peers so you can provide them with an environment where they can thrive and be successful. And because if you don't have that, then they're going to leave.
I asked you about the challenges, but now you mentioned that autism can manifest also in talents and in things that allow you to do, you can do things better than, what a non-neurodivergent person can. What are some of these things?
I'd say that, like, anecdotally, and this is just me being observing what I'm able to do. I'm able to like see patterns quickly and like see solutions to technical problems that sometimes take other people a longer time. Then I can go ahead and implement them. With the work at Mentra, I've been able to write so much code, do so many features, and work for so many things because number one, I can just zone in and zoom in and get it done. That doesn't mean that like I don't spend long time on certain features that require more care and thought, but depending on the complexity of the feature, these things take a lot quicker for me to do while still maintaining code quality, testing all of that, and still getting it done in a lot quicker every time I take to someone else to do. And part of that is because I've spent the last 2.5 years building this platform. I volunteered for Mentra beforehand, so I'm very familiar with what everything that's going on, and I have a great rapport, a great relationship with all the leaders. But beyond that, it's just a matter of them trusting me to go ahead and do it, and then I just do it. So I really say like that problem solving, seeing connections to things, working through situations, and then also being able to articulate it. I studied information science at Cornell, which is a combination of computer science and the arts, ethics, and humanities. I had a UX user experience design slant to my program. So I'm able to really effectively take what I'm doing with a technical lens and communicate it to non-technical people and tell them what's happening, tell them why it's happening, and explain it to them so they know what's going on and they're not left scratching their head wondering what's happening. I can sit in the meetings with product managers, designers, analysts, and talk to them based on what I'm doing, and we're all on the same page. They don't need a translator or anything.
How can our audience and maybe even companies, managers, whatever, whoever's listening in, learn more about neurodivergence?
It's funny, I actually recorded a YouTube video for this very subject with Mentra because this month is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Long acronym. If you look on my LinkedIn, you'll see it. I will send it to you as well so you can put it elsewhere. But if you are a manager of someone who's neurodivergent, really just helping them be successful, a lot of it comes down to just having a discussion with them and to their level of comfort, because you may not know they're neurodivergent. It's not your place as a boss to ask that. If they come to you and say, hey, I'm autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, whatever, then you could do a lot with that information, asking your employer what resources are there, and then asking them, okay, like, what can I do to help you be successful? What can I do to help you, whether it's from a social lens or a technical lens or whatever, to help give them that structure. If you are a peer, a coworker, someone's neurodivergent, it's very similar. There's less responsibility. It's asking them, like, what can I do to be respectful and help you do your thing? One thing I had at my second employer, we had working with me documents. And I really recommend this for any company. It helps you describe as a person, how do I work? How do I operate? And that applies for anyone who is neurodivergent or neurotypical. Just having it up front to say, this is how I operate, these are my working hours, this is how I work, this is my setup. If you need me, this is how you do it. That's a really helpful way as well to understand how folks work, how they think, and also do it in a way where it's not off-putting. If you have someone neurodivergent on your team, but you have other people who aren't, you have them all do it, and then you ask your neurodivergent person to, like, if you help them out with it, that'll really help them, like, be honest up front with their team in a way that's not singling them out or ostracizing them, because that will also really be a problem if you, like, put them on a pedestal and show them to everybody. But if you're respectful and thoughtful about it, it'll really go a long way, and they'll appreciate it.
I love the human guides idea. I do it as well with my team. It's fantastic because it gives you like a perspective of how that person behaves in general, and it gives you like a deeper understanding of why they would react to certain things the way they do. And it's not necessarily limited to just, people who are neurodivergent. Just like we are all very diverse in how we engage, how we react, how we talk, how we solve problems, and all sorts of things. And that's really great. Shae, thank you very much for being so open and candid, and also for sharing with us all of this information, knowledge, insights.
Of course.
Any last thoughts?
I appreciate you having me again. This month is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. If you know nothing about neurodiversity, I implore you to reach out to me on LinkedIn or wherever. I'd love to talk about it. And if you want to learn more about how to help someone who you know who is going through something similar, if they're neurodivergent or you think they are, just be respectful and talk to them. They're not an other. They're not less than you. They are as much a person as you are. And the last thing you want to do is treat them like this fragile thing. They have needs and they have things that they have going on just as much as anyone else does. So just talk to them, treat them like a human person, and you'd be surprised at what comes out of it.
Thank you very much, Shae. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Have a great day, folks.